So what the results are telling us is that while the Aboriginal groups are clearly nomadic, they are sedentary as well. They're moving around all the time, but within their own territories, which are clearly very well recognised between the groups, where the boundaries are and where people were. And that's a kind of almost counterintuitive concept. They're nomadic sedentists, if you like. And what it also means, which I think is very interesting, is that to be on the landscape for this kind of time period, 50,000 years, means that you've come up with a couple of things. One, an ability to live in balance, if you like, with the resources that are present in that particular chunk of territory, which you might say that much of the rest of the world we haven't really shown we can do. This is quite an exceptional thing. The second kind of implication, as well as being able to live within your means in those areas, is that there haven't been any major wars, which is what we see in the other parts of the world when we try and do genetics. We see massive movements of the Roman Empire, the Mongol hordes, Alexander the Great, massive wars going all over the place, moving DNA everywhere. And what we're seeing here instead is, while there are certainly going to be conflicts, and they're well recorded on the borders of their territories, we're not seeing the wholesale movement of people through famine, major migrations or wars. And we think what might be going on here is that the difference is the lack of farming. When you start farming and producing large amounts of fairly poor quality but cheap food, the population tends to increase quite rapidly. And once you've got a large population that are reliant on all these calories coming off the farming products, you need to feed them such that if there's a bad year for the crops, you've got a whole bunch of people that are going to have to get up and move somewhere. Conversely, if you're doing particularly well and have built up a large amount of assets in that area, the temptation for some of your neighbours who you don't have such good relations with to come in and invade, to steal those assets, becomes much larger. And effectively, we think not having farming, not having this population pressure and these large amounts of either food or materials has somehow ended up the situation where people are far more in balance in their environment and not having these large-scale human conflicts, which really makes Australia quite a remarkable example for other parts of the world in terms of what humans can do living in balance with an ecosystem. Not to say that they didn't change it. They changed the ecosystem quite significantly with the constant burning. But nevertheless, 50,000 years in one spot is still better than anyone else has managed to do. One of the big things that we've found really is that we can take genetic sequences that are Aboriginal and actually place them on different parts of the map of Australia. So that means anyone with Aboriginal ancestry, or that thinks they might have Aboriginal ancestry, has the potential to determine their genetic sequence and then be able to actually find on the map where that sequence is being recorded. And this has got real benefits for people that have been culturally dispossessed. So that would include the stolen generation, for example, but many other individuals that have Aboriginal ancestry or have been told that they might have. But due to the erasure, if you like, of Aboriginal culture through the 30s, 40s and 50s, where you didn't talk about that, and language was not allowed to be used, and you were denying any part of you that was Aboriginal in many places. That caused a whole generation of people that have lost their connection to their ancestry, which the genetics can now resupply. And that would also work for material that is held in museums around the world, including in Australia, where quite often the problem is not that the museums are not keen on repatriating the material, is they can't tell where it should go because the original geographic provenance is so poorly recorded on so much of that material. Again, the genetics can actually start pointing to exactly where on the map it's likely to have come from. So I think we will see a lot of people are very interested in starting to explore this new ability, and really it's just incredibly fortunate that the genetics are so distinct. One thing we need to keep in mind really is that the work has only just begun. This is 2 years into the project really, And we've only contacted a small number of Aboriginal communities and families to date, something like about 150. What we are hoping is that this project is going to go on for 10, 15, 20 years, and that we can reach out to all of the communities that were originally contacted and sampled in the expeditions. And so rather than just, I think we're now up to 4 or 5 different locations, we could be looking at 400 or 500 potentially. Every part of Australia that was recorded, we can go back and create a detailed genetic picture from. And at that point, the stories about Australia are not just the big picture, how it was peopled and where the first movements were, but all the subsequent events, all the things that have happened in between. And that, I think, is when you're really starting to get a detailed history of Australia.